It was supposed to be the happiest night of the year, our neighborhood Christmas party, full of laughter, lights, and kids running everywhere. But then, out of nowhere, HOA Karen stormed in like a hurricane, her face red with anger. "This is unacceptable," she screamed, pointing at the decorations like we'd committed a crime. Everyone froze, the music stopped, and for a moment, I couldn't believe what was happening. And then, my heart nearly stopped. She grabbed a little boy by the hair right in front of me, yanking him toward her as he screamed. I felt rage, shock, and fear all at once. That's when I realized she had no idea who she was dealing with. Before things got even worse, I had to make a choice. Quick, tell me, which city are you watching this from? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, because you won't believe what happens next. I still can't believe how fast one moment of joy turned into absolute chaos. Our Christmas party wasn't just any gathering, it was a celebration of community, of laughter, of kids running around with candy canes and parents sipping hot cocoa. We had spent weeks decorating the park, stringing lights across every tree, setting up a small stage for carolers, and yes, even building that giant snowman that everyone loved. For a few hours, everything was perfect. But then HOA Karen showed up. If you've ever met someone who believes the rules are above everything, above kindness, above fun, above human decency, that's Karen. She marched in, her heels clicking like a countdown to disaster, eyes scanning for anything she could complain about. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't going to be just another argument about violating HOA guidelines. She was on a mission. Before I could even approach her, she did the unthinkable. A child, a little boy laughing as he held a chocolate cookie, was suddenly yanked by his hair. The entire crowd gasped. Parents froze. I felt my stomach drop. And in that instant, a part of me had to decide whether to react as a neighbor or as someone with authority that she had absolutely no idea existed. Now, before the story really kicks off, I have to ask you, what city are you watching this from? Comment below. I want to see if your town has its own Karen moments. And hey, make sure to subscribe because what happens next will shock you. The night started like any other Christmas in our neighborhood. Twinkling lights lined every porch, wreaths hung on every door, and the smell of pine mixed with cookies baking in ovens everywhere. Families gathered in the park, laughter bouncing off the trees, kids running with glowing candy canes, and adults chatting over mugs of hot cocoa. It was magical. I had spent weeks planning this party, not just because I love Christmas, but because it was about community. Everyone was supposed to feel welcome, safe, and happy. We had a small stage set up for carolers, a table overflowing with treats, and even a giant inflatable snowman that lit up when you walked past. The kids were mesmerized. Parents were relaxed. It felt perfect. And that's when she appeared, HOA Karen. Now, if you know someone like Karen, you understand immediately when they enter a room. It's like the air itself gets heavier. She doesn't smile. She doesn't greet anyone. She just scans the area like a predator looking for prey. She wears her authority like armor, and you can tell she's been plotting this visit for days, maybe weeks. As soon as she stepped onto the grass, heels clicking, eyes narrowing at our decorations, I could feel the tension spike. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter faded, and I knew something bad was about to happen. Karen didn't walk. She marched, and as she got closer, her lips twisted into that familiar, judgmental sneer. "This is unacceptable," she barked, pointing at the table of cookies as if anyone had asked her permission to serve them. "You cannot have lights this bright. You cannot allow children to run unsupervised. And this snowman, this is ridiculous." The crowd murmured nervously. People were polite, trying to calm her, but Karen wouldn't be reasoned with. She thrived on control, on bending others to her will. And tonight, she had decided that our joy, our celebration, was her personal battlefield. For a few seconds, it seemed like a scene from a nightmare. One of the kids tripped near the snowman, and Karen's eyes darted like a hawk. Her lips curled, and she marched over to the boy. "You, watch yourself," she snapped, her voice cutting through the festive music like a knife. The boy looked up, confused and scared, clutching his cookie. And then it happened. She grabbed him. By the hair. Time slowed. I froze. The crowd gasped. Parents yelled. I could see the child's small body tensing, tears welling up in his eyes. It was unthinkable. No one expected this level of aggression at a neighborhood Christmas party. I felt my blood boil. Every instinct told me to intervene, to pull her away, to protect the kid. But at the same time, I realized she had no idea who she was dealing with. She was acting like a regular, entitled HOA tyrant, but she didn't know that the person standing in front of her was the mayor of this city. Even in that moment, I held myself back, watching her flail for control over something she had no right to touch. The crowd was frozen, unsure if they should step in or stay back. Everyone's eyes were on me, and for the first time that night, I knew I had to take control, not just as a neighbor, but as someone with authority. Karen, oblivious to the magnitude of her mistake, was still scolding the boy. "Do you know how many complaints I've had about things like this?" she shrieked. Her voice was high-pitched, trembling with anger, but her arrogance blinded her to reality. Around her, parents and children were terrified, but also confused. How could anyone act so aggressively in the middle of a festive celebration? I took a deep breath. The music had stopped. The twinkling lights now seemed dim compared to the tension radiating from her. And I realized something. This wasn't just about decorations or rules. This was about power, about her need to feel superior. And in that moment, I decided that she wasn't going to win. Before stepping forward, I glanced around at the neighbors. Some were frozen in fear. Some were whispering to each other, asking if they should call the police. And the children, they were shaking, scared, unable to understand why Christmas had suddenly become a battleground. I promised myself that no child would leave this party with that memory as the main one. As I walked toward her, I could feel Karen's eyes locking on me. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flash across her face, though she quickly masked it with indignation. "And who are you supposed to be?" she demanded, still holding the boy's hair. "Are you going to stop me?" I knew this was the moment where everything could either explode or be contained. My heart raced, not out of fear, but anticipation. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, the crowd held its breath. I realized that this was bigger than a party, bigger than Karen. This was a test of authority, of courage, of community. And in that instant, I knew I had to reveal the truth, because only then would the chaos end, only then would the children be safe, and only then could Christmas continue the way it was meant to. But before I could say anything, Karen still had that boy in her grip, and the tension in the park was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every parent, every neighbor, every child was staring. And then she laughed. A sharp, cruel laugh, thinking she was untouchable. That's when I realized something terrifying. Karen didn't just want to stop the party. She wanted to humiliate us, to dominate us, to make everyone afraid. And that's when I decided she was about to learn exactly who I was. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Karen. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor or someone who loved rules. She was the embodiment of control. From the moment she moved into our neighborhood, she acted as though the streets, the parks, and even the air we breathe belonged to her. Lawn heights, mailbox styles, even the way we hung our Christmas lights, it all became her personal checklist of violations, and she kept meticulous records. She had spreadsheets, yes, spreadsheets, detailing every minor infraction she'd ever seen, from chipped paint on a fence to children skateboarding slightly too close to her house. The thing about Karen was that she didn't just care about rules. She cared about power. There was a sharpness in her eyes, a rigid set to her jaw, that told you immediately this woman had to be right. Always. And if anyone dared to defy her, even subtly, they would pay the price, sometimes socially, sometimes legally, and sometimes, well, in ways you didn't see coming. Over the years, she had alienated most neighbors. Families who had once been close grew cautious, whispering behind closed doors about Karen incidents. Some moved away, unable to tolerate the constant tension. But the rest of us, we had learned to tread carefully. We respected the rules she actually enforced, but when it came to something like a Christmas party, we also knew that she would try to ruin it. That's why the tension was already thick the moment she appeared. People who had been chatting, laughing, sipping hot cocoa froze. Some clutched their children closer. Others whispered frantically, "She's not going to ruin the party, is she?" And yet, as much as we knew her reputation, no one, including me, expected what she did next. I had spent weeks preparing for this night, not just the decorations or the treats, but the vibe, the joy. I knew Karen might show up, but I never imagined she would actually touch a child. Her aggression wasn't verbal, it was physical, shocking, almost primal. That's the moment I realized this was no longer a holiday party. This was a test of every boundary, every limit we had in our neighborhood. And Karen? She wanted to cross them all. But let me rewind a bit to show you why Karen acted this way that night. It wasn't just control. It was personal. She had been obsessively monitoring our neighborhood board meetings for months, listening to complaints, cataloging them, waiting for a moment to correct us. And when she learned about our Christmas party, her mind went into overdrive. Lights too bright? Children too loud? Music too festive? In her mind, it was an assault on order itself, and she couldn't allow it. I watched her pace near the snowman, muttering about danger and rule violations to anyone who would listen. And while she spoke, the way she looked around, sizing up the decorations, it was clear she had planned to make a scene. She thrived in these moments, feeling omnipotent while everyone else cowered. But she underestimated one crucial thing: the strength of a community when it sticks together. Around her, neighbors were quietly discussing whether to intervene. Some of the braver ones approached, trying to calm her down. "Karen, it's just a Christmas party," one mom said gently. But she wasn't listening. Karen's world was black and white. There was no room for nuance, for compromise. To her, rules weren't guidelines, they were weapons. And that night, we were her target. I could feel the party's energy shift. Kids were confused, parents anxious, and I knew that if we didn't act quickly, the night could descend into something far worse. But I also knew that any direct confrontation had to be carefully measured. Karen wasn't someone who would back down easily. She thrived on chaos when it benefited her. She wanted attention, fear, and compliance, and she was getting all three in that moment. It's hard to describe the kind of tension that fills the air when one person holds that much control in a room. Time seems to slow. Every movement is exaggerated. Every glance is magnified. I could see the boy, still in Karen's grasp, tears forming, clinging desperately to his cookie as if it could shield him. And then I looked at the parents, some frozen, some ready to act, some whispering prayers. The entire neighborhood was holding its breath. This is where the story takes a turn. Because while Karen believed she was dominating the situation, she didn't know about the authority I carried. She didn't know that the person she was threatening, the person she had been building tension against for months, was also the mayor of the city. And that knowledge would change everything in an instant. But before that reveal, let me paint the full picture of the chaos. Imagine decorations swaying in the winter wind, the snowman looming large and oblivious to the drama, kids crying softly, neighbors trying to maintain calm, and Karen standing there, victorious in her mind, hair of the child in her grip, voice sharp as knives. That was the reality, and it was terrifying. I could feel the adrenaline spike in me, every instinct screaming to protect the child, protect the community, and maintain control. But this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who believed that we could have joy without fear of someone like Karen ruining it. That's when I realized, to stop her, I couldn't just argue or plead. Words wouldn't work. This was bigger. This was a demonstration of authority, of power, and of truth. And Karen, blinded by arrogance and her own sense of righteousness, had no idea what was coming next. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Is he going to do something? Who is he? He's the mayor? None of them knew yet, and neither did Karen. But in the next few moments, everything would change. The power dynamics would shift. The fear would turn into shock. And the night, which had started as a simple celebration, would become unforgettable. And that's exactly why the hair-pulling incident was the tipping point. It wasn't just aggression, it was a challenge, one that Karen had thrown down without realizing who was standing in front of her. And when I finally stepped forward, ready to act, everyone knew that this Christmas party would never be the same. The moment felt like it stretched for hours. Karen's fingers were still tangled in the boy's hair, her face red with anger and triumph, as if she had somehow won some imaginary battle. But the atmosphere around her told a different story. The entire neighborhood had gone silent. Kids who had been laughing minutes ago now stared, wide-eyed and frozen, clutching candy canes as if they were shields. Parents whispered urgently to one another, unsure whether to intervene or step back and let the situation escalate. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest as I took a step closer. My voice was steady, but my hands were tense. "Karen," I said firmly, trying to make sure my tone commanded attention without provoking her further. "Let go of him." Her eyes snapped toward me. For a second, there was a flicker of doubt, an emotion Karen was not accustomed to showing in public. Then she sneered, her grip tightening. "Who do you think you are? Telling me what to do?" she spat, jerking the boy slightly. He cried out a mix of fear and pain, and I could feel the anger rising in the crowd. Neighbors began whispering to each other, voices shaking. "Call the cops, should we?" Some were frozen in fear, others ready to rush in. But there was a heavy sense of disbelief in everyone's eyes. No one could comprehend how a festive, joyful gathering had devolved into this nightmare. And the worst part? Karen had no intention of stopping. I took another step forward, and this time I raised my voice. "Let him go. Now." Her response was a harsh laugh, the kind of laugh that sends chills down your spine, because it carries no reason, only cruelty. "And what? You'll stop me? What can you do?" That's when I realized it wasn't enough to assert authority verbally. This was about presence, about showing her that her intimidation tactics would fail, not just for me, but for everyone present. So I reached forward, gently but firmly removing her hands from the boy's hair. The crowd gasped again. Parents breathed sighs of relief, though fear still lingered like a shadow over the park. The boy ran to his mother, shaking, tears streaming down his face, and she pulled him close. I felt a rush of both anger and protectiveness, knowing that this shouldn't have happened. Karen's face twisted. She looked at me, disbelief washing over her features. You dare," she started, but her words faltered. She had been so confident, so sure of her control over the room, that she hadn't anticipated resistance. And resistance from someone like me, resistance from someone with authority, was a shock she wasn't prepared for. Around us, the neighbors began murmuring, emboldened by what they saw. People who had previously stood back were starting to step forward, some shaking with anger, others shouting at her to leave. The energy of the crowd shifted. The fear in the air transformed into collective power. Karen was no longer the center of control. She had become the focal point of everyone's scrutiny. And yet, she didn't back down. Her hand shot toward the boy again. But I intercepted her quickly. My voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough. This ends now." Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face, her lips trembling. That's when I knew the moment had come. The moment where she would learn that she had miscalculated, massively. The neighborhood had watched her for years, but she had never seen me like this. Calm, controlled, firm, unshakable. In that heartbeat, I decided to reveal the truth. "Karen," I said, louder this time, letting the authority in my voice resonate across the park. "Do you even realize who you're threatening?" Her brow furrowed, confusion replacing some of the anger. What are you talking about?" I looked around at the gathered neighbors, all eyes on me, then back at Karen. "I'm the mayor," I said, letting the words hang in the crisp winter air. Every syllable felt like a hammer striking down her sense of dominance. The reaction was immediate. Karen froze, her jaw slackening, eyes widening in absolute disbelief. The smug, confident expression she had worn like armor moments ago crumbled. Her hands, which had just been so aggressive, faltered. The boy, still clinging to his mother, looked up at me with wide eyes, sensing that the tide had turned. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind seemed to hold its breath. The snowman's lights twinkled innocently, unaware of the human drama unfolding below. Then came the murmurs, neighbors whispering to one another, pointing out the truth that Karen had not known. "The mayor," one woman gasped. "You're the mayor?" Karen's face went pale. She looked around, realizing that the entire crowd now recognized the power shift. For the first time, she felt vulnerable. She had underestimated me and underestimated the community. Her authority, built on intimidation and fear, had no foundation here. She tried to recover, her voice quivering. I didn't know, but her words were weak, brittle, unable to mask the shock and humiliation that spread across her face. In that moment, the neighborhood exhaled collectively. The tension that had held everyone captive snapped, replaced by relief, empowerment, and a quiet celebration of justice. People began to smile, to hug, to assure each other that everything would be okay. Children cautiously returned to their games, and the festive music slowly resumed, mixing with the faint jingles of remaining Christmas decorations. And Karen? She was left standing there, stunned, powerless, and humiliated. She had come to dominate, to terrorize, and to assert control, but she had failed spectacularly. The lesson was clear. Intimidation has limits, and when you cross boundaries that involve children and community, even someone like Karen is not untouchable. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline drain. The boy's mother thanked me, her eyes still glistening, and the crowd began to disperse, murmuring stories they would tell for weeks. That night, the Christmas party had survived, and more than that, it had grown stronger. Karen's presence, her aggression, had inadvertently united the neighborhood in a way that no decorations or festivities ever could. But the night wasn't over. The tension that had exploded in those moments would have repercussions. Neighbors whispered about reporting her behavior, calling authorities, and making sure nothing like this ever happened again. And Karen? She would have to face not just the embarrassment, but the accountability of her actions. In the end, the confrontation wasn't just about stopping one person, it was about defending a community, protecting children, and asserting the values that mattered most. And as I watched the crowd gradually relax, I knew this Christmas party had become more than a celebration. It had become a story of courage, authority, and the triumph of right over fear. Karen's face froze the moment I said the words, "I'm the mayor." For a woman who had built her entire sense of superiority on rules, intimidation, and fear, those three words hit like a lightning bolt. I could see her hands twitch, the grip on her coat tightening as though she could physically pull back reality and undo what she had just heard. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "You what?" she stammered. The crowd was silent. Every neighbor, every parent, every child, even those who had frozen with fear just moments ago, were now staring. Some gasped audibly. Others whispered to one another, trying to reconcile the image of their nosy, aggressive neighbor with the reality of a woman being confronted by the mayor. The shift in power was palpable. The park, once dominated by Karen's tension, now pulsed with the quiet strength of a united community. Karen tried to recover, taking a step back, but she faltered. I didn't know." Her words were brittle, failing to mask her panic. That confident, sharp tone she always carried, the one that silenced neighbors and made even adults wary, was gone. For the first time in years, she was vulnerable. "You didn't know?" I asked calmly but firmly, letting my voice resonate across the park. "Do you really think anyone should ever have the right to grab a child by the hair? To intimidate families at their own celebration?" My gaze swept across the neighbors, who nodded in silent agreement, their eyes wide, relieved and emboldened. Her face flushed red. Not with anger, but with the shock of being publicly exposed. She opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to justify, but no words could undo what had just happened. The reality of her actions, combined with the authority now in front of her, left her speechless. Around us, whispers began to spread through the crowd. "The mayor? I can't believe it." She's actually the mayor. The community's collective awe and shock created a strange energy, an invisible shield of unity and empowerment. Karen, who had thrived on fear and division, suddenly found herself isolated in a crowd that no longer feared her. I took a deep breath and continued. Karen, you have rules, yes? But rules are meant to guide, not to harm. To protect, not to terrorize. And tonight, you crossed the line. My voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of authority and moral judgment. The boy's mother stood nearby, holding her son, her eyes thanking me silently for stepping in. Others nodded, emboldened by my stance. Karen's hands shook now, no longer a tool of aggression, but of uncertainty. I was just enforcing the rules, she blurted. The absurdity of it hung in the air. The rules she wielded as weapons suddenly seemed petty, almost ridiculous, against the backdrop of her own humiliation and the larger moral truth of what had just occurred. This isn't about rules, Karen, I said firmly. It's about respect. It's about safety. It's about community. And when you grabbed that boy, you violated all three. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Around us, the neighbors murmured their agreement, a wave of collective validation that made Karen's panic more pronounced. For the first time, I saw her flinch. Not physically, but mentally, her arrogance, which had been her shield for years, cracked. I could see her trying to calculate her next move, what to say, how to respond, how to reclaim even a shred of dignity, but it was futile. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. And then I added the final piece, the moment that would ensure accountability. You will answer for your actions. This behavior is unacceptable, and the city will take the necessary steps to ensure it never happens again. My voice didn't waver. It was steady, commanding, final. The crowd reacted instantly. Some clapped softly, some cheered quietly, and parents drew their children closer, relieved that justice had been articulated in front of them. The tension that had gripped the park moments before began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of vindication. Karen, however, remained frozen, a mix of disbelief, embarrassment, and anger clouding her face. She tried to speak again, stammering out fragments of excuses, but no one listened. The authority was clear. The neighborhood had witnessed the power of moral action backed by legitimate authority, and Karen's attempts to intimidate had crumbled before it. As the minutes passed, Karen finally stepped back, her hands trembling at her sides. The crowd didn't cheer. This wasn't a celebration yet, but the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. The boy, now safely with his mother, looked at me with a mixture of awe and relief. His small hand clutched mine briefly, a silent gesture of trust, and I knew that in that moment the entire community had learned something profound. Fear only lasts as long as people let it. Karen's retreat was reluctant. She lingered near the edge of the park, muttering under her breath, but her presence no longer commanded attention. The festive music resumed, softly this time, like a careful step back toward normalcy. Families began to relax, some hesitantly, others with laughter and cautious smiles returning. The decorations, the lights, the snowman, all regained their intended magic. But the night had changed. What had started as a simple holiday celebration had transformed into a lesson in courage, authority, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Karen's aggression had exposed the fractures in the community, but it had also revealed its strength. For a long moment, I looked around the park. Neighbors were talking, quietly, exchanging glances of reassurance. Children were cautiously resuming their games, but now with the knowledge that they were safe. And somewhere in the distance, Karen's muttering faded into the winter night. The story of her aggression, and of the mayor who intervened, would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks, even months, becoming a story parents would tell their children as a reminder of courage and community spirit. I knew that this revelation, my identity as mayor, hadn't just ended the immediate threat. It had sent a powerful message. Authority is not about fear. Authority is about protection, justice, and moral action. And in that moment, I realized that the strength of a community is measured not just by its celebrations, but by how it responds to threats, both large and small. Karen, though still seething privately, would never forget this night. The children and families, though shaken, would carry the memory of safety restored. And I, standing there amid the twinkling lights and cautious smiles, understood something deeper. Leadership isn't always about grand gestures or speeches. Sometimes it's about stepping forward in a moment of chaos, confronting wrongdoing, and ensuring that everyone, especially the most vulnerable, is protected. The chaos had passed, but the park still buzzed with a charged energy. Families were slowly returning to their holiday celebrations, cautiously at first, as if they were testing to see whether the nightmare had truly ended. Children tiptoed around, some clutching parents' hands, others holding on to candy canes like talismans of safety. And in the midst of it all, I could see the weight of what had just happened settling over the crowd. Relief, yes, but also the lingering shock of witnessing aggression and the power of standing up to it. Karen lingered on the outskirts, muttering under her breath. She was no longer in control. The spell she had woven over the neighborhood for years had been broken. Parents who had once flinched at her presence now held their heads high. Voices that had been hushed or fearful were rising, sharing stories and laughter once again. The community had reclaimed its joy, but the night's events left a mark, an unforgettable lesson in courage and accountability. I spent the next few moments walking through the crowd, speaking to families, checking on the children, and letting everyone know they were safe. Parents thanked me repeatedly, some with tears in their eyes, grateful not just for my intervention, but for the message it sent, that children and families in our neighborhood would always be protected. The boy whose hair Karen had grabbed hugged his mother tightly, still trembling, but slowly beginning to smile again as he realized he was safe. Even as the park began to return to a semblance of normalcy, Karen's shadow loomed in the background. But unlike before, the community no longer feared her. Conversations began about how to hold her accountable, how to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. I assured neighbors that proper channels would be followed, that her behavior had crossed legal and ethical boundaries, and that authorities would be notified if necessary. The next step was crucial. Karen needed to understand the consequences of her actions, not just for my sake, but for the safety and morale of the entire neighborhood. I contacted the HOA board and explained the situation, documenting everything. Photos, witness statements, and neighbor testimonies painted a clear picture of her behavior. It wasn't just a scolding, it was a formal warning backed by community oversight and city authority. But even as formal steps were taken, the emotional closure was equally important. I gathered the neighbors together, not in anger, but in affirmation. Tonight, I said, we showed that our community stands together. We don't let fear dictate our lives. We don't let intimidation win. And most importantly, we protect the most vulnerable among us, our children. The crowd nodded, some clapping softly, others wiping away tears. There was a sense of unity, of shared strength that had never felt so tangible. The families began to relax further. Children resumed playing near the lights and decorations, parents joined in conversations once more, and laughter returned to the park. The snowman, once a silent witness to the chaos, seemed almost symbolic now, bright and cheerful, surviving the storm, just like the community itself. Karen, meanwhile, retreated to her house, a defeated figure of authority that no longer held sway over the neighborhood. Her attempts to dominate, to instill fear, had failed completely. The lesson was clear. Power without responsibility, authority without respect, and control without compassion would always crumble when faced with courage and justice. Over the next few days, the story of the Christmas party spread through the neighborhood. Parents discussed it in morning coffee chats, neighbors shared the tale with friends, and even the local news picked up a sanitized version highlighting the importance of community unity and vigilance. But for those who were there, the memory carried more than just newsworthy drama. It carried a lesson in human decency, courage, and leadership. I made it a point to follow up with each family, ensuring that the children involved felt safe and supported. We talked about bravery, not the kind that comes from aggression, but the kind that comes from standing up for what's right, protecting others, and maintaining calm in chaos. For the parents, it was a reminder that community strength comes not from fear of one person, but from solidarity and action. As for Karen, formal consequences were initiated. The HOA board issued a formal warning, and city officials were made aware of the incident. While the legal process would take its course, the social accountability was already in place. No longer could she wander the neighborhood unchecked, believing her power extended over everyone. She had been seen for exactly what she was, a bully whose reign depended on silence and fear, both of which had evaporated. By the end of the night, as the park emptied and the neighborhood lights twinkled against the crisp winter sky, there was a sense of peace, a hard-won peace. Families returned to their homes, still talking excitedly about the evening, about the courage they had witnessed, and about the safety restored. The boy who had been grabbed by the hair smiled again, holding his mother's hand tightly, understanding that some adults could be trusted to protect him, and that authority could be a force for good. The Christmas party, which had teetered on the brink of disaster, had not only survived, but had become a testament to resilience. The event had transformed from a simple celebration into a story of empowerment, justice, and community unity. We had faced aggression head-on, stood together, and shown that fear has no place where courage, authority, and morality converge. That night, I realized something profound. Leadership isn't about asserting dominance. It's about standing up when it matters most, protecting the vulnerable, and reminding people that they are never alone. And for our neighborhood, that Christmas became more than lights, carols, and snow. It became a symbol of strength, courage, and the unbreakable bond of community. As the last families left the park, the twinkling lights cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The festive music faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of relieved neighbors talking softly, recounting the events of the night. What had started as a joyful Christmas party had turned into a test of courage, authority, and community unity, and somehow, against all odds, we had emerged stronger. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The snowman, still lit and looming over the park, seemed almost symbolic, a silent witness to chaos overcome. Children laughed again, albeit more cautiously, as they retrieved lost candy canes or began to retell the story among themselves. Parents exchanged glances of relief, some holding hands, others wiping away tears. Every face in the park reflected the same sentiment. Fear had been replaced by trust, anxiety by empowerment, and despair by the undeniable strength of our community. Karen, the woman who had threatened to ruin everything, had been forced to retreat. Her attempts to dominate, to frighten, to assert power through aggression had failed spectacularly. In her absence, the neighborhood regained something far more valuable than decorations or holiday cheer. It regained its sense of safety and solidarity. Everyone realized that fear only lasts as long as you allow it. The moment courage and justice step in, darkness is illuminated. Reflecting on that night, I realized the true lesson extended far beyond a neighborhood conflict. Leadership, true leadership, is not about titles or authority. It's about protecting others, standing up against wrongdoing, and taking decisive action when it matters most. That Christmas party had become a microcosm of life itself. There will always be those who try to dominate, to intimidate, to sow fear. But there will also always be those willing to stand firm, to defend the vulnerable, and to ensure that justice prevails. And this is where you, the audience, come in. I want you to think about your own community. How often do we let fear or intimidation silence us? How often do we step back when someone needs protection? The events of that night were dramatic, yes, but the principles are universal. Stand up, protect others, unite. Let this story be a reminder that courage can ripple outward, inspiring not just immediate change, but lasting impact. Now, before I wrap this up, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Which city or town is your home? Comment below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Your city's name could even inspire the next story of courage, confrontation, and community strength. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell icon so you never miss stories like this, stories that are shocking, emotional, and full of unexpected twists. Let's take a moment to reflect on the aftermath. In the days following the party, neighbors reached out to each other more than ever. Parents shared tips, safety advice, and heartfelt thanks. Children retold the story as if it were a legend, cautious, yes, but proud that they had witnessed adults protecting what mattered most. Karen? She remained a presence in the background, but no longer a threat. The weight of accountability had finally caught up to her, and the neighborhood collectively understood that actions have consequences. This story isn't just about one aggressive neighbor or one mayor stepping in. It's about the power of a united community, about the ripple effects of standing up against injustice, and about creating an environment where everyone, especially the most vulnerable, feels safe, valued, and protected. That night, I didn't just save a party. I helped reinforce a principle that defines what we stand for as a neighborhood, as a city, and as individuals. So here's the takeaway for you, watching right now. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet step forward when others hesitate. Sometimes it's the firm word when everyone else is frozen. And sometimes it's the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when the world feels like it's collapsing around you. You have that power. Each of us does. And when we act, change happens, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. As this story comes to a close, remember, the next time someone tries to intimidate or harm others, or the next time fear seems stronger than courage, think of that Christmas party. Think of the boy whose hair was grabbed, of the parents who froze, and of the moment when authority and community stepped in. That's the power of standing together. That's the power of taking action. That's the power of protecting what truly matters. And now, before you go, I want one last thing from you. Comment your city below. Share this video with friends and neighbors. Let them hear this story and be reminded that courage and community can overcome even the most unexpected chaos. And most importantly, subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story, the next twist, the next lesson in courage and justice is coming very soon. You won't want to miss it. So wherever you are, remember this. The lights may twinkle, the snow may fall, and the party may end, but courage, justice, and community, that lasts forever. And it starts with you. Now, I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another shocking, emotional, twist-filled story like this one. If this story inspired you, share it with your friends and family. Let them see what courage, community, and standing up for what's right can achieve. And remember, it's not just about watching. It's about taking action in your own life, standing up for others, and creating a community where everyone feels safe and heard. So comment, subscribe, and share. Let's keep the conversation going because the next story is coming and you won't want to miss it.